This week on the No One Is Watching podcast, I'm joined by St. Louis Cardinals first baseman and National League MVP Paul Goldschmidt. Goldie talks about how two simple qualities instilled in him by his parents, work ethic and humility, fueled his growth from under-recruited high schooler to one of the best players on the planet. Well, Goldie, good to see you, man. I appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
So you've got over a decade now in the big leagues. It's kind of hard to believe looking back on some of the things we were talking about earlier. But what's one thing you wish you knew back then that you know now?
Oh man, I think just how quickly it goes, and I think I don't know if you can really live this out, but I mean, I feel like as a younger player, you're like, oh well, there's always next year. You're giving it your all, but you have a rough year. Or you don't win. You're thinking there's always next year. We're going to win it next year. Well, it's not that easy. Here I am, 12 seasons in, and never played in the World Series, and have played in the playoffs. But there was a time there where I think it was 6 straight seasons of not being in the playoffs and not really even being in the playoff hunt. And so then, once you're in it every year, that's where you want to be. And, unfortunately our season, we're pretty far back. It's going to take a huge run to get in. And, but then as your career winds down, you're like, man, I might not have another year. I might not have too many more, that you just know those opportunities to, play in the World Series or win it. They don't come along very often. Even the greatest players or teams, they don't get very many chances. And so I think as you start to look back, you're like, man, it's just tough that way sometimes.
Yeah, you made your debut in a playoff race. You came up in August, and we wound up winning the division, and you kind of hit the ground running. So you probably thought every year was like that, right?
Yeah, no, it was great. I mean, yeah, that's what you want to do. I mean, I couldn't imagine a better start to my career, and was able to, contribute. And I think we were like 2 games back of the Giants, who just won the World Series. We won those first 2 games of my career, and I was like, wow, this is amazing. Every game felt like a playoff game. And then we got in the playoffs and, unfortunately got walked off, but just a great experience. And yeah, you think that's going to happen every year. And the next couple of years, I think we were 500, and they felt like hugely disappointing seasons. And they were. And I think that's the mindset that you want, is if we're not in the playoffs or we're not having a chance to win the World Series, why are we here? So I know sometimes, there's a building of a team and an individual, but those are the most fun times. If I look back on my career, what's your favorite moments? It's by far playing in those big games and playing in the playoffs and having those opportunities. And when you don't get them, it's disappointing.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. Particularly for somebody that came up in your first taste of the big leagues was in a playoff race, and then you got to the postseason, and we were a couple outs away from the NLCS, and then you go through some winning years, and you go through some not so winning years, and baseball, more than any other sport, right, is a long season. And I know as a competitor, you're never going to say, okay, we're out of it, let's fold up shop and go home. But you get too far behind the 8 ball, you've set a pretty tough hurdle in front of you as far as the baseball season goes. How do you approach that, from a leadership perspective, from a competitor standpoint, of like, okay, like odds are wildly stacked against us of us going to the postseason, but we got a lot of games left to play. How do you approach that as a competitor?
Yeah, I mean, I think number one is individual. You just always have to be competing. That part's not that hard for me. I mean, I want to beat that pitcher and catcher combination. I want to find a way to get on base every time I'm out there. So that part isn't that tough, but I can, it's easy from a team standpoint to kind of, I don't know, it's hard to describe, but you're just kind of like, don't have as much of that competitive. It's kind of like, why are we when we win and we're still back, and we lose and it's like we're still back, and it's kind of just shrug your shoulders. So I think, the teams that I've been on, we've always found little goals. Of course, just staying in the moment, staying in the game. You can't be looking too far ahead. Even when you're in the playoff race, you can't be like, oh, if we can just do this, this, and this, we'll be in, because you can lose focus of that game. So I think trying to win that game, in baseball, just trying to win that series, I think that's a very easy goal. I'll use us as the Cardinals this year. We, had a really bad first month, and we're very far behind, and people were talking about it. And I think our in the clubhouse, we were talking about, let's just start winning series. You don't need to win 10 in a row or go on some crazy winning streak. And we got ourselves back in the race, and eventually we fell back. But I think just kind of having those smaller, shorter goals that are attainable, and if you do that over a longer period of time, then you'll give yourself a chance to get in. And in 2021, we were over 10, 11 games back, which is a similar spot we are now. We won 17 games in a row and made the playoffs. And I mean, that was an amazing comeback. And, I think our focus was, again, just trying to win the series. We were just talking about it. We were playing a bunch of playoff teams. And if we could just, win 2 out of 3, win 3 out of 4, that we would start slowly climbing back. And then all of a sudden we won 17 in a row. And I think the longest winning streak the Cardinals organization ever had. And that was never the goal. And if it was, we probably would have never got there. So I think just having those little goals and definitely staying in the moment.
Yeah. It's you can't set out to win 17 straight, right? Especially in baseball, where the momentum is not as tangible as it is in some other sports. You run up against the opposing ace. You can run into 3 opposing aces in a row if the schedule doesn't shine upon you favorably. So it's tough to look at it that way. But I mean, you've been a part of teams that have done some really. I mean, 17 setting a record for the Cardinals in any capacity is a pretty good accomplishment with all the history that organization has. But I want to go back a little bit to when you were growing up, because we were talking a little bit earlier about our kids and athletics. Did you play multiple sports growing up, or were you just a baseball guy?
No, I played everything. I growing up as a kid, played soccer, I played baseball, played football. I mean, we played whatever sport was in season. I played basketball up through 7th grade, football up through 8th grade. Like I said, I played roller hockey growing up in Texas. We didn't really have ice hockey, but I remember messing around with lacrosse. So any sport that we could play, we were playing. I mean, baseball was probably always my favorite, and but I mean, it was a dream to play in the major leagues. It was never, I wouldn't even say a goal. I mean, you're just a little kid and you're like, there's no way that's going to happen. But, I loved it. They kept letting me play. And then kind of high school started and kind of same thing. I just was kind of playing and enjoying life and trying to figure out, I guess I still am, but try to figure out who you are as you're 14, 15 years old. And not until really like my sophomore year, when a lot of the seniors and stuff were getting college scholarships, and I was not as good as them, but kind of saw that, hey, in a few years I could maybe be on a similar level, that I even think about continuing to play baseball after high school, or even taking it seriously. And but once I did, then I was all in, and again, never trying to make it to the major leagues, but just giving it everything I had, and always had backup plans, and school was always the top priority for my parents. And of course, we would still mess around playing other sports, but that's just kind of how it worked out.
Yeah, and you talked a little bit about playing in college. You grew up, or at least you went to high school in Texas, right? The Woodlands area, which is a really well-known area for athletes, high school athletics, and a lot of kids go on to play college, and there's plenty of professional athletes that have come out of that area as well. I'd heard that you wanted to go to UT at one point.
I want to go to every school, and none of them wanted me to go there. So I ended up going to Texas State, which was amazing. Met my wife there, and so many lifelong friends, and the coaches there were great. I mean, I can't say enough great things about Texas State. I learned so much on and off the field. So it's just funny how life works out. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of what happened. I was, a good player, and I think a lot of those schools were probably going to wait to see. It wasn't their top priority for recruiting. And, schools like Texas State and a few other, the mid-major schools, or some of the schools that weren't necessarily the top tier, started kind of recruiting me a little bit more. And I figured it was a great opportunity, and get an opportunity to play right away, which was awesome. I played basically every game that I was healthy and got a lot of at-bats, and the coaches there were great teachers. So I learned a lot. I was able to improve, and, you guys drafted me with the Diamondbacks, and, another crazy thing happened.
Yeah. I've talked about, from the front office perspective, right? You're a right-handed hitting first baseman. And those guys, like, the margin for error for that profile is pretty thin. Those guys need to, there's always they're left-handed hitters, but the Mark Grace's, JT Snows of the world, who are like wizards with the glove that can sort of carve out really successful careers. But more often than not, those guys need to hit and hit a lot. And so I'm curious, probably not that age, but it's a little bit humbling when you want to go to a school and they're not interested, right? Or you want to do something and you can't at a certain point. How much self-awareness do you think you had about sort of your ability, your development, your sort of your progression? You're a pretty self-aware person now, but I'm curious when that kind of clicked for you.
I mean, I'm assuming it probably had to be part of my mental ability was to be self-aware, and there were a lot of kids that were a lot more talented than me, that were faster than me and hit the ball harder, more athletic. And this is my dad. I'll give him the credit, or probably both my parents, about just really keep me in the moment and say, hey, my dad had a big conversation with me after my freshman year of high school. He goes, hey, if you want to play baseball in college and make the varsity team, which was a big deal to do that as a sophomore at the Woodlands, he's like, you're going to have to work harder than anyone else in this school. You're going to have to stay after practice. You're going to have to show up early. You're going to have to get in the weight room. You're going to have to sprint. You're going to take extra ground balls, extra swings, basically do everything possible to improve. If you're just showing up to practice like everyone else, you're not going to get better and you're not going to accomplish these goals. And he's like, we love you no matter what. You guys, this is your choice. It's your life and we support you. But you're telling me this is what you want to do. So this is what it's going to take. And I mean, I became obsessed. I was like, yeah, that's what I want to do. And I stayed after practice. And my goal was just exactly what he told me I needed to do, was to work harder than everyone else. After workouts at school, I'd go home and work out or go to the gym or stay late and hit, and just put every single thing I had into my career, I guess, or into trying to accomplish these goals. And so I think then, as maybe getting recruited or not getting drafted as high as maybe I would have liked, or whatever, not being a prospect in the minor leagues, is like I just kept that same mindset of really like, okay, I'm not as good as maybe I'd like to be right now, or maybe these other players are better, but I'm just going to do everything I can to keep improving, and hopefully one day I'll catch them and get an opportunity. And I think I definitely still have that mindset, almost probably to a fault sometimes. It's hard to kind of take that away when that's something that was ingrained to you at a young age. And so it's a blessing and a curse to have that mindset, but I definitely would rather have that than the other way.
Yeah, well, it served you well. There's a little bit of healthy fear, right? Like if I'm not working today, somebody's gonna catch me. Somebody's gonna start
Yeah,
outworking me.
yeah, for sure. And I think just never being satisfied, and always, finding ways to get better, and just all those things. And I think also there was a lot. And I think, I moved through the minor leagues really fast, which was really kind of crazy. I definitely didn't see that coming. I don't know if anyone in the world saw that coming, but it just kind of happened. And I think a big part of that was dealing with failure at a young age and not being the most talented, and, having games in high school where I was 0 for 4 with 3 strikeouts, and all these things that I think in pro ball really get exposed. There's just so much more failure as the talent level evens out. And it's really more about how you're dealing with these things than necessarily making these physical adjustments. And so I think that was a huge thing that accidentally happened. And so then in the minors, I was able to, as my talent had caught up a little bit, these mental things, dealing with failure, playing every day, consistency, having, routine and work ethic, not getting too down on yourself during struggles, or not getting too high when you're having success. Those things really kind of propelled me through the minors and into the big leagues, and even having success, pretty early on in my big league career.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you seen that new Steph Curry documentary? Have you caught that one?
I've seen it.
It's I'm a Davidson alum, so I'm an admitted homer for him, but it was really well done, and something that jumped out. I just watched it a couple days ago. Something that jumped out. There was a lot of talk, both from him and from coaches, teammates, whatever, throughout his career, just like the importance of confidence, not just self-confidence, right? Like I can do it. I know what my talent level is, but also the confidence that other people show in you, right? He talks about his coach giving, he had an awful first game in college and he's in the starting lineup again the next night. And he's like, that made a huge impact in my ego and my confidence that they had faith in me. And then I'm curious because you just touched on, you came into pro ball with that mindset of like probably more humility probably leaning more humble than confident, right? You were confident in what you could do, but you'd also had some scar tissue built up before you even got there. And so that's where like the sweet spot is when you have people that are confident they can go do it and they know what they can do, but not going to get ahead of themselves. And, again, that healthy fear of like, okay, I got to keep working because that's what got me here.
Yeah, and I think that's why I was saying it's a blessing and a curse because sometimes, you don't want to play into that mindset of, oh, these other guys are so much better. And you do need to have that confidence. So, yeah, I mean, there was definitely coaches and players. I remember a time with the Diamondbacks, actually, that first year, Ian Kennedy was going for his first win. And, man, I almost made this error with a guy on third. And luckily, the ball went under my glove, but it hit my foot, and the guy didn't score. And I remember after the game saying to Jeff Blum, like, man, I almost blew that game, and he wouldn't have got us. He's like, we love you no matter what, man. I don't care what would have happened. We got your back. And I was, I got to go home with like confidence, like you're saying that, even if I mess up, because we're going to mess up in this game, that these guys still want me here and they still are going to support me. There was another game I remember where I think I was 0 for 5 with 4 strikeouts, and a bunch of the veteran guys, came up to me and said, hey, don't worry about it. You'll get them tomorrow. And Gibby put me back in the lineup, thankfully. And so I showed up the next day, ready to go, instead of like, man, these guys are looking at me like, oh, I just let them down and what am I doing? And we need a new player. So, yeah, I mean, that's huge. And that's the importance of, being a great teammate or being there for the people around you is, you can have an impact on the game, and I try to remember that even if I'm not playing well, on the field now, because now I'm in those guys' shoes as, being 10 plus years in the big leagues, and we have a lot of young players, is, even if maybe I don't have my best game, trying to be aware of what other people are going through. And of course I can do a better job of that, but something I'm trying to notice and trying to be there and say, hey, good game today, or hey, don't worry about it, you'll be in there tomorrow. And just, that's huge to help other people's confidence and help mine as well.
Yeah, it's little stuff, I mean, guys that have, and a lot of times they're not the superstars, right? They're usually the role players, the guys that have been hanging on for 3 or 4 years as a reserve infielder, backup catcher, whatever it is. The little sort of gestures of like, hey, hang in there, we got you. That can go a long way. Particularly for guys who are young and maybe confident and talented, but haven't done it yet. And it's like, the big leagues is like until you do it, you may think you can do it, you may like feel really confident, but like you don't know you can do it yet. I mean, it's a lot of those guys I tell everybody, the guys that play on TV are freaks, and it's like they can do things that you can't really appreciate unless you see it up close. And so until you do that at that level, as you know better than anybody, there's probably that exhale of like, okay, I do actually belong here. I'm okay.
Yeah. I mean, that's nice. I mean, there's always going to be those nerves, but it's part of it. And yeah, I mean, that confidence is a huge thing. Everyone's trying to see who has it and who does it. And if you have it, even with maybe some not as great physical skills, or even when your swing or maybe off or you don't feel great, you can still find a way to get the job done.
Yeah. I don't know if I've ever shared this story with you or not, but I've shared it with other people. But I figure it's time I probably tell you, since you're like the star of the story. But when we were in Arizona and we signed you to your first multi-year deal, sort of a long drawn out process, went through sort of late off season, early in spring training. There's a point where it was like, okay, it's not going to get done. That's okay. We'll just go play. It'll be fine. And then 11th hour, he came back and we were able to get something done. And I remember having conversations, and again, gets back to right-handed hitting first baseman, what's the risk reward essentially, right? From an investment standpoint, when you look at it from the front office. And you'd already had some success in the big leagues. You were a year plus in at that point, I think. And where I came out on it was, I don't know what he's going to be exactly as a player. I think he's going to be a good player. He has a chance to be a great player, but I'm willing to bet on a human being, if nothing else. And so this guy's not going to go do something crazy when he gets, that first big check. He's humble. He's going to work hard. He's going to maximize whatever that ceiling is. He's going to maximize it because he's just wired right. And I'm not, you're probably like sweating right now because you're talking about yourself, but that was where I felt about it at the time. And look, lo and behold, you win the MVP last year, and you've gone on to do some incredible things and have a lot of success. So I'm incredibly happy for you as a person. But the story that I actually want to tell is when we signed you to that deal, you have your press conference. And it wraps up. We're walking back to the clubhouse, and I think I'm walking in front of you or whatever. And I'm not the GM, right? I'm the assistant GM. Nobody really cares about what I'm doing. And we're walking back to Gibby's office for you to physically sign, your first big contract. And you pull me aside, kind of off the corner, and you're like, "Hey, I just want to thank you for all the time you spent on this deal with my agent. I was in touch with them. He said you guys were back and forth, and it took a lot of time. I just really appreciate the effort and the time." And that always stood out to me because one, you didn't need to do that. Two, most people don't have the awareness or really care. You're about to sign a big check, and you're like, you had the humility, the awareness to say, hey, this guy was working to try to get this done, and I appreciate it. So I don't know if I ever told you that, but
No.
it always left an impression on me.
Oh, that's
And
good.
it made it easy to root for you after that because if nothing else, it validated how I felt as we were negotiating the deal that this is a good person, and if nothing else, we're going to get the most out of him, no matter whatever God's given him, he'll get the most out
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I don't remember that. I'm
of
sorry.
it.
That's
That's
good. I
okay.
didn't know where this story was going, and I could
Yeah.
have. I was nervous.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
thanks for making me look good.
Yeah, yeah, man. Hey, I think that's what I told you when you signed the deal. I said, go have a good year and make us look good. You did.
Yeah, I think I do remember you saying that. So
Yeah, yeah, and you did. I think you finished second in the MVP that year. So you made
yeah.
us look way smarter than we were. But I know one thing. Getting back to the humility theme a little bit. You've talked about sort of your faith and that journey. For you and for me, it's something that whether you're a religious person or not, if you believe in something bigger than yourself, it's a lot easier to be humble, right? It's sort of like in it's sort of the definition of having faith or being humble, whichever way you want to look at it. So I'm curious about what that journey has been like for you, what roles that played for you in your career as well as your personal life, sort of embracing that.
um. Well, I think number one, it started out with my dad and my mom, my parents. I mean, humility and being humble wasn't an option, so it was what was required. And I remember many times where my parents would discipline us if we were acting a certain way. Or I was thinking about it the other day, my dad made me run at practice one time when he was my coach, just run laps because I wasn't treating some other players in the right way. So I think that was drilled into me at an early age. But definitely as I became a follower of Jesus, which wasn't until I was probably 25, 26, 27 years old, already in the big leagues and made a lot of money. I mean, I think that theme obviously was something that, if you read the Bible, what Jesus's life was about and what he was doing. So now as trying to follow in his footsteps, yeah, that's definitely something I'm trying to do, and plenty of times failing at that. But yeah, yeah, definitely, it's something that has been imparted on me. Like I said, at a young age, and now in in a later age, and something that's also extremely important in my life.
Sure. You talked about growing up as a kid, sort of dreaming of the big leagues, not necessarily looking at it as a goal. And you look back now and you've accomplished a heck of a lot. I know you don't have the one thing which I'm sure you're sort of craving more than anything, which is a ring. But whether it's an award or accomplishment, what are you probably most proud of to this point in your
I mean, I think the things we're going to remember are definitely going to be the relationships that we've had, like with players or coaches, front office members, or just employees of the club or people around the league. I mean, I've been blessed to just meet some amazing lifelong friends and um, just people that have had a huge impact on my life, mentors and all that stuff. And I think hopefully I've, you know, now been able to share some of that and some wisdom with some of our younger guys and kind of fill in a little bit more of that leadership role and follow in the footsteps of the guys who are older than me. So I think that's definitely what I'll look back on and just those memories. But as far as accomplishments, I think last year winning the MVP award, it's hard to top that. And again, the coolest thing about that, I've said that, which is the relationships, is because that doesn't happen without the people that I believe God surrounded me with, and whether it's just being drafted by the Diamondbacks and having hitting coaches in the minor leagues like Alan Zinter and Turner Ward, who really imparted a ton of wisdom on me so that I was able to have success early in my career. All the veterans and other players and coaches we had in Arizona. I mean, I learned so much from Kirk Gibson and Matt Williams and so many of the players there. And then getting traded to St. Louis, getting to play with, multiple Hall of Famers with Yachty and Albert last year was unbelievable. So, and
Yeah,
just
what was
learning.
that like? I mean, you talked earlier. You were with one organization for most of your career. You lived there locally. It was it's as normal as you get in pro sports, right? You kind of live in the city that year round in the city that you play in,
Yeah.
and particularly for guys with families, that's a big deal. And then you go to a storied franchise with a couple of Hall of Famers that that softens the blow, I'm sure. But were you surprised? Were you shocked? Were you disappointed? Were you excited?
It's kind of weird. I mean, you don't really know what you have until you look back on it. I mean, Arizona was all I knew, and I loved it there. And I think being a little naive, I probably just assumed I was going to be there after I signed that one, contract with you. And then, you know, I hadn't really thought much about it. And then all of a sudden, it was like I talked to the GM there, and they were like, "Hey, we're going to look at trading you this offseason." So, I think there was like a tiny bit of shock, but I think right off the bat, I was just like, "Okay, this is just what's going to happen." And just was kind of preparing for it. And I didn't make too big a deal out of it. It was just going to be what's going to be. When I got traded to St. Louis, I think it was the perfect spot for me to get traded to. I knew a few of the players on the team, and I had played with guys that had played in the Cardinals organization. They spoke so highly of it, and so it was a much easier transition than probably most other teams. And like I said, I had some ex teammates and friends, and they welcomed me. And St. Louis is an easy place to live in and play in. So it was probably one of the easier transitions. I was very blessed in that sense, and I was also fortunate that they wanted to keep me around and sign me to another contract, and have been able to be here for this is my fifth season now, which is crazy. And
That is crazy.
yeah, so but
Were
I
you
don't
when
know if this is
you
what you're asking about, but
uh,
probably one of the coolest moments was just definitely playing with Pujols last year, and everyone asked about it. But I was on deck when he hit homer number 700, 699, 700. I didn't hit behind him that often. He was hitting fourth and fifth, and I was hitting second and third. But in this game, he was hitting second, I was hitting third, and he hit homer 699 in his second at bat, I think, and it was I've never had this feeling before, but I'm like, he's going to hit 700 this next at bat. Like, this is absolute no doubter. Like, this is the most obvious thing ever. And so I remember asking our bench coach Skip Schumacher, I was like, "Hey, what do I do in this situation?" When he hits it, like, I don't know how to react on deck. And so he's like, "Man, just let Albert do his thing." And of course, he hit it, and then the next at bat. And I mean, I was right there in line and saw the whole thing. And uh, man, I cannot believe I got to be part of that in his season. And
that's
man,
getting seared in your memory, just from a
that's
vantage point, right?
yeah, it was amazing. And there was so many times last year I was like, okay, just take this in because you're never going to see this again. It wasn't just him. I mean, Yachty was passing people, and like I said, Albert was passing guys, Babe Ruth and Hank Aaron in these stats, and you're like, this is you couldn't make this up. And then Yachty and Wainwright were breaking the all-time record for starts together, and so many other records. So to be able just to see that and be part of it was truly amazing. And it was just it's crazy how God works. I never would have thought I'd got to the big leagues, much less accomplish what I have, and to be part of that. It wasn't even anything I did, but just to kind of see those guys. And I know we talk about you're talking about leadership and so many things. I mean, those guys set such an amazing example too, and they were just always there. I mean, Albert was a guaranteed Hall of Famer. He was coming off the bench to give guys innings off of defense, and was coming in as a pinch hitter, and was so happy about it. And so I think, talk about humility, that guy was one of the ultimate, most humble guys that I've ever seen, and just set this amazing example for me and everyone else. And it was just really cool to see and be a part of, and something I'll never forget.
A little softer landing when you go to a place that's got a couple of Hall of Famers sort of on the tail end, kind of welcome you in with open
Yeah.
arms.
And I mean, and I think too, is like, you're just, you're taught, like, I just tried not to make too big a deal. Like, out of whatever was going to happen, I try to go with life as much as possible because I mean, I had no control over the situation. I think sports do a great job of teaching you that, whether it's a call that an umpire makes or what your schedule is or a rain out or something. It's like you just really learn to just go with it that you don't have control and you instead of wasting all this time complaining and making excuses. I mean, I still do it. I try really hard not to. I've just you know Peter Crone, who was the mental coach there in Arizona, and him and I are still working together. I think that's something he really, really helped me with is just realizing all these things are out of our control. Just give no or give as little, thought to him as you can. So once the Diamondbacks said I was going to get traded, just like my wife and I were just thinking, okay, this is cool. We're going to go someplace new. It's going to be a new adventure. And kind of taking that attitude, like instead of like, oh man, why don't they want me here? What did I do wrong? This, and that. So again, it just comes back to that mindset. And I think sports are just a great way to prepare you. So trying to look at it as an opportunity, even if maybe some part of me in back behind is like, man, why didn't they want me or something? I think those are the natural questions when you get traded or a
Sure.
school doesn't recruit you or you don't get drafted as high. And so, man, look how life prepares you for these things in the future. And so now if they've happened, not that I handle them perfectly, but I'm better prepared for it. And same thing, like there's so much failure in this game. When I fail, instead of looking like, man, I stink, and why did I swing at that pitch, or I made a mistake, or whatever. It's like, okay, like what can I learn from that moment? Um, I mean, there's going to be that disappointment when you're walking back to the dugout, or especially if the game's online. But I think once you can kind of step back and say, okay, what can I learn from that, so that the next time I have a better chance of success. And again, that's not physical skills; that's all mental. And I mentioned Peter. I work with him all the time, and um, even the best that two, the hitting coaches that had a huge effect on me, Alan Zinter was in the minors with us in Arizona. A lot of the stuff we talked about was mental and then Turner Ward, who I had as my manager, and then another hitting coach again. And a lot of the stuff we talked about was mental. And even Gibby, as hard nosed player as he was, and man, that guy was the best competitor I've ever seen. A lot of stuff we talked about was mental. Is hey man, you might be 0 for 4, but you can make a great play on defense to win us the game, and you might be 0 for 4, but hey, you get a fifth at bat, and just I think those things just I'm always just trying to work on that part of my game. Of course, the physical part too, but especially that mental.
Yeah, I mean, baseball's got to, I'll argue that it does it better than any other sports just because exactly what you just touched on. There's just so much failure. I mean, even if you have a great night, you go 2 for 4 with 2 homers. That means you only got to hit half the time. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So there's just so much failure in it. And that's one thing that I think I would love to be able to impart on the world in general, that people that whether they're athletes or not, or even care about sports, but that forced it just forces you to move on with life. You can't control things that are out of your control from in the game. Pitchers, as soon as they let that ball go, they have no control over what happens next. Swing and miss, error behind them, whatever. And we talked about this a lot, with a few different places I worked. But how do people deal with that failure and adversity, right? And some players don't really fail until they get to the big leagues. I mean, you look at your minor league career. I'm not as familiar with your amateur career, but you breathe, unexpectedly, you said by you and probably some others, you breeze through the minor leagues. You were putting up monster numbers, and then you get to the big leagues. There's a lot of guys that do that in the sense of, okay, they're just talented enough, or they're fortunate enough and good enough to just post up numbers every year, and then they get to the big leagues. You're eventually going to fail, right? You're gonna crash hard. It's a matter of like how you bounce back from that. And it's such an incredible lesson for people to take with them, because there's just so much that's out of your control, and it's more about how you respond to it than it is what happens to you. And I know you've embraced that your whole career, probably your whole life, and it gets back to your mom and dad, I'm sure.
I had to. I wasn't. I don't know if I was. It wasn't the plan, but when you fail, and I think a lot of that, like I said, was a little bit younger, and growing up in Houston and Texas, like the competition was so high with sports and baseball in general. I mean, we were playing guys that were going. I mean, I was a sophomore, and these guys were going to play. They were playing in the College World Series next year. These guys on my team and on other teams, and so you were gonna fail. It wasn't like, hey, I need to go play. And I remember when I was 15, they wanted to put me on the 16U team. My dad was really pushing to play an 18U, so I hit ninth on that team and probably played second base and right field, and my stats were terrible. And I don't know if that was his plan. I mean, I don't think it was. I remember him saying, "Well, hey, if you want to play on varsity, you need to play against kids better than you because that's what you're going to do then." And I was only 15, and so we went and found an 18U team, and I probably hit last on the team because I was 2 or 3 years younger, and you can't help but fail and not be as good. And so maybe that humility got pushed on me and that dealing with failure more than, and it just happened that, those were skills. I mean, that's the skill that's going to transfer to any walk of life. So sports just brings it out, which, why I think you and I and a lot of others encourage our kids to play sports is because I'm not to say sports are a metaphor for life. There's so many things, whether it's dealing with failure, the game is unfair, bad call, line out, strike out, whatever it is. You got to work with teamwork. You work with people from, I mean, now in pro ball all across the world, you got to learn how to deal with people that have different opinions than you, different personalities, different backgrounds. You got to learn how to work together. Just the work ethic part of it. There's just so many great things that sports bring out. And then, as I think, I got 2 kids and you got 3. Now you said it's like how I want to make sure that I'm not stopping them from failing because I look back in my life and how great failure is. It's hard to do as a parent, right? You want to
Yeah,
protect your
yeah,
kids and you want to, do everything you can. But I'm like, so many times I'm like, all right, well, like this is a good thing that, he's failing or he made a mistake or someone was rude to him or he wasn't treated fairly. And because he's going to have to learn to deal with that.
yeah. And that's, I won't get up on my dad's soapbox, but that's a big. I spend a lot of time thinking about that, and I think that's going to be a huge separator for kids. Our kids are the same age, and so growing up, going through COVID and what that did to the world, and um, you know, our kids are both at the age where, thankfully, they're probably a little too young to really get impacted by it, but another year or two, it really could have affected them. But just the ability to interact with people and to empathize and to communicate and to just sit down and have a conversation. I would we get flooded, as you can imagine, with resumes for internships, people that want to work at teams and in professional baseball. And it's like, man, these people are way smarter than I am. Like their resumes are way better. And then you sit down across the table and you're like, I could not work with this person for 5 minutes, and it's just that ability to connect with another human being is going to be like a huge separator, in my opinion, for sort of this generation of kids, because I think it's coupled with the whole technology focus of everything now. There's just the face-to-face stuff is not what it once was.
Yeah, for sure.
You talked a lot about your mom and your dad and the influence that they had on you. I have to imagine that they played, if not a direct, at least an indirect role in you going back and getting your degree while you were in the big leagues in Arizona. Can you talk to me a little bit about that and why that was so important to you?
Um, yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the stuff my parents they instilled in us. I got 2 younger brothers at a younger age, so it wasn't like I was in the big leagues. They're like, hey, you need to go get your degree. I think once we were out of the house, even before we were out of the house, they gave us a good measure of freedom. But there were consequences when you made mistakes or you didn't do things a certain way, all the way back to high school and younger. And so going back to get my degree, it wasn't something that my mom or dad made me do. It was just something I wanted to do. School was always a top priority. It was always, hey, make sure you take care of your schoolwork or you're not going to play on the sports team. So that was a very big motivator for me and my brothers because all we wanted to do was play sports, uh, whether it was just outside in the park or officially on a team. So, I was a pretty good student and I worked pretty hard at Texas State to try to keep my grades up. And so when I got drafted, there was a year left, and I was trying to go back even when I was in the minors, but there wasn't really online classes and access like there is now. And then when I got to the big leagues, there was the program through University of Phoenix where you could take classes online and finish up my degree. So I was able to do that over took me probably 2 years, 18, 24 months, and yeah, I was really proud to be able to do that and wanted to do it for myself, but also set the example for future kids of mine about the importance of education and I didn't want my hard work in college to go to waste either. And also I didn't know how long my career would be. And I still don't know what I want to do when I'm done, but I didn't want to be held back by not having that college degree. So, I was preparing for a lot of different options and didn't want to take a career in the big leagues for granted, and wanted to be prepared for whatever opportunities come my way as well.
That's great. I think you've always had that awareness, or I guess appreciation for where you are, in your career, and not taking it for granted. And I think that's a huge blessing. I remember you talked a little bit earlier about how you wanted to have kids that were old enough to sort of remember you being a player, what that was like. And you've got that now, which is awesome. I'm curious, when you were a kid, playing all these sports, growing up in Texas, it's, sports crazy. Who are some of the athletes that you kind of idolized or looked up to?
Well, I mean, the Astros were my favorite team. My dad grew up in Boston as a diehard Red Sox fan. You can't get that out of your blood. So there's probably some Red Sox players. But in Houston, I mean, when I was a little younger, I mean, you had Craig Biggio and Jeff Bagwell were kind of the guys there. And I remember my dad talking about how hard Biggio would play, how he'd always run out ground balls and pop ups, and he was always dirty. And so I think, my dad was imparting that's how you play the game on me. And, we'd be watching games at night and whatever. And if there was other players on the team that maybe didn't do something that he thought was correct, he would make sure to point it out. And so, again, he's never, once I got old enough and definitely out of the house, it's not like he was getting on me. We really don't talk that much about how I'm playing or any of that type of stuff. But it was definitely imparted at a young age that there's a certain way you play the game. There was a right and wrong way, at least in his opinion and other people's opinions. And so I remember that about Biggio. I remember Bagwell. He was a great hitter, but he was great at defense and a great base runner as well, even though he probably wasn't the fastest guy. I mean, I wasn't a first baseman, so it wasn't like I was watching that, but I think just the importance of all-around player probably stuck in my head, definitely about him. And then as I got older, was Lance Berkman was kind of the guy there. And in Houston, he was just kind of a combination, probably a little bit more like Bagwell in that he was not the fastest guy, but he was a sneaky, really good athlete, a great hitter, and a great base runner. And definitely, I've got an opportunity to meet him. I mean, one of the cooler moments of my career is he got on first base, maybe like my second year, and he knew who I was, and so he was like my favorite player. And he was from Houston, and the fact that he knew who I was and where I went to college was like the coolest thing. I remember one of the
That's
few
awesome.
times I got nervous on the baseball field, and I've gotten to know him and hang out with him. And again, one of the most humble people you'll ever meet. Just again, all three of those guys probably great role models for me and for my kids, and just again, just trying to follow in their footsteps and be like they were and are, and kind of carry on the tradition in the way that they played, and keep it going.
Yeah. I mean, you talked about your dad being I'm from Boston as well. And I was on the trip when you made your first, Fenway Park. You played your first game at Fenway Park. You hit a ball over the monster.
I did.
And have to imagine there were some tears out of dad at that point.
Yeah, it wasn't just him. I had my grandfather and
Oh, really? Oh, it's amazing.
in the stands. I mean, I didn't know, and we had, yeah. So first time in Fenway, and my whole, dad's side of the family is from Boston. Was able to hit a home run over the monster my first at bat, and the next morning we had like a family reunion brunch, and there was like 40 people, and my grandfather came up and he started crying. He's like, I can't believe I ever was going to root against the Red Sox, and I had a grandson's Diamondbacks jersey on, and then my uncle was the same thing. He started crying, my dad started crying. I was like, man, this is you forget the impact that sports can have and how diehard, for lack of a better term, people are with their sports teams. And it was really cool to see that emotion for them. I mean, for me, I was just trying to do my job, maybe not get sent down, or get yelled at or something. But to see that it was really cool, and it was awesome to be, just see that passion, the love they had for the game and their team and me as well. So every time we go back, it's special, and yeah, it was just a really cool moment.
It's a good point about sort of the impact of sports. You could, you didn't have to watch the game last night. You can just walk into Dunkin' Donuts in the morning and you can just tell if they won or lost based on like the mood. It's like it has such an impact on the region, and it's like that with the Celtics, the Patriots, the Bruins, and all of it. But you get when you're in it as long as you've been in it. I'm sure you get numb to it, right? It's just your life, and so it's easy to lose perspective of the rest of the world, what that the impact that it has, the impact you can have as an athlete and sort of an ambassador, and um, just the power that sports can play, and it sounds a little corny, but the power it can play in society, and like the thing it can do, the positive things it can bring into the world.
Yeah, I mean that's a great point. It's hard. I mean, sometimes you're just like, man, I'm just trying to do my job. I'm trying to play, or man, I'm struggling right now. I've been at the field just hitting in the cage for hours, and then it might be something small, but if you just try to take a little bit of time to wave to a fan or sign an autograph. I try to be very aware of it. I try to remember. I'm always thinking about the kids that are watching me play, probably because I watch so many games. And just I say a little prayer and remind. Part of that is reminding myself of the people that are watching me, and but it's not it's not easy. It's not perfect, and sometimes I'm like, man, I just need a second to go sit in this dugout or get out
Yeah.
of it. But I think the more we think about the impact, it's usually a good thing, and it usually keeps some perspective, good or bad. When you're going great, there's billions of people that don't even know about the sport of baseball in this world, and
Right.
definitely tomorrow most people won't care. And then, but when you're going bad, there's millions of people that are rooting for you on TV every night, and you have an opportunity to make their day, and especially just like with a little wave or an autograph or something can make somebody's year almost. And so it's really cool to have that power that you can take 10 seconds of your time and make someone so happy. And I wish we could do it more, but our time is limited.
Yeah. Did you ever have that as a kid? Did you ever run across an athlete in person, get an autograph or anything?
I don't think I did.
No.
I never really got that opportunity. We would always go to batting practice and, um, go early and watch and stuff like that. I mean, maybe, what I did have, this was cool is, for a buddy's birthday. I think we were in high school. We went down early for batting practice to watch the Astros, and they were playing the Marlins. And AJ Burnett was pitching, or he was in the outfield shagging. I had like some old ratty glove, and he came over and gave me his nice Rawlings. I had his name on it, and he's like, "Hey,
Nice.
hey, can he?" Yeah, he's like, "Hey, kid, hold this for me." And he took my glove and shagged me pee with it. I was like, "Oh my gosh!" We were like joking, like, "Should we run off?" Of course, we did
Right.
it, and I'd never seen like a glove like that. And he came back and gave me a ball afterwards, and he was like a rookie or second year. And I was like, man, that's cool. So I kind of followed him, even though he was on another team. His next start, he threw a no hitter, and
Oh, it's
so I
karma
was like,
right there.
wow, yeah. And then he got so big as I faced him, and I was telling that story to like Aaron Hill and John McDonald, who played with him in Toronto, and they're like, "That's crazy. You got to tell them." And I was like, "No, no." And they ended up telling them. And so, I don't usually get like pictures to autograph anything because I'm always competing against them. But AJ, I got him to sign a ball just because I thought that was just a cool story. And
That's great. Yeah.
man, where the game takes you, and just little stories like that it was pretty cool.
Yeah. One thing that I have to imagine is a little bit surreal for you is I read this not that long ago, but it was during the WBC. You are the only player in MLB history to play in 5 countries. Is that right? Is that the stat?
Yeah, when we played in London this year. So, but the way the game's going, that's going to be passed up soon. I mean, they're playing in 2 to 3 different countries every year now. But yeah, we
Hey, you're
Mexico.
still first, man.
I'm in it now. So I did save like a jersey and my batting gloves from that to be the first guy to play in 5. But I do think that's going to get passed up. I don't. They're expanding internationally now. So, but it was another little crazy cool thing that's happened in my career.
Yeah, I was with you in Sydney. You don't grow up thinking you're going to be playing baseball in Australia, but yeah, it's just the path you get put on sometimes.
Mhm.
One more question, then I'll let you run. But you were talking about it with Berkman and Bagwell and Biggio, and just kind of the well-rounded nature of their game, right? And that's something that I saw you work on in the minor leagues, and it seemed very, not just the minor leagues, you did it in the big leagues too, but it seemed very deliberate. It seemed like you were almost uh, from the outside looking in, it looked like you were kind of picking an area that you felt like you needed to improve, and you're like, all right, I'm gonna just work on this till I can check that box and move on. Is that, am I close? Is that
Well, there's no moving on. You just keep working on it.
right? Right.
But yeah, I do remember. I mean, I think that was always like important to me, and I think just I don't want to just like dive into the mindset, but just like trying to get better or thinking that other guys maybe were more talented. That I knew I had to do these little things if I was gonna keep my job or keep moving up in the minors or get to the big leagues. So I think there was, hey, I need to do all these little things. But I do remember after the year in high A, and I hit really well. I won the MVP that year of the Cal League, but my defense was not good, and I knew I could be a better defender. And I think I just gotten away from it and just kind of gotten a little lazy. And I think my mindset was just, oh, like I play first base, let's just hit. And that next year,
Plus,
I
you're in
had
the Cal League, man. You're launching balls in the Cal League.
yeah, I know, yeah, everyone was, and but I remember that off season thinking like, if I was gonna go to Double A, and I knew with KT being the GM that he liked to call guys up from Double A, so I would have an opportunity. And I looked at next year as like, man, if I want to get called up to the big leagues, I better be able to play defense, because you're not going to go to the big leagues and just rake right away or ever. And so that was definitely something that I really wanted to put a point of emphasis on, and got invited to big league camp, and the coaches there were great of working with me and other players. And I think that's where it really started. I think it was Wilson Valera was like one of our Latin assistant coaches on the big league roster, and he kept bringing me out every day for early work, and I was the only guy. And I was like, this is kind of weird. What did I do? But first 2 weeks were ugly, and then like I just remember this one day we were doing drills at first base, and then I just like, instead of missing balls and getting hit, I just caught every ball that day. I was like, oh my gosh, this was awesome. And so I just kept doing that, and then kind of did a lot of those similar drills that whole year in Double A, and got called up. And that was huge because I was able to play, good defense. I don't know if y'all would have called me up if my defense was suspect, but I know I was able to stay in the lineup, because there's going to be ups and downs when you're young, and even when you're an older veteran player, hitting is going to go up and down a lot more. And so focusing on defense, you can help the team win. It keeps you in the lineup, base running, different things like that. So
the base running is something that you clearly spent a lot of time and energy on. And I noticed the first couple years in the big leagues, you're always at least from when I started seeing you in Double A. That was my first year in the organization. But you're always like a sneaky good base runner. It was like there's this expectation of like this big burly right-handed hitter, first baseman. This guy's just going to be kind of a clogger. But you would like pick your spots, and you were a good base runner even if you weren't always the fastest guy. But then you took that to another level after a couple of years, a year or two in the big leagues. It was very clear to me that you had like focused on this, and not just got better at it but because you had gotten better, you got a little bit more aggressive with it, and you were getting a little bit more, just having more success doing it. It was obviously a focus for you.
yeah, a big credit of that in the big leagues goes to Eric Young, senior. He was our first base coach, and I think it was my third day in the big leagues. He's like, "Hey, you want to steal?" I was like, "Yeah," and he said, "All right." We waited, and he told me what pitch to go, and I went right away and got the jump and stole. And I think, he was like, "Oh man, I like this kid." And then he, every time he'd tell me to run, I'd steal. And Joel Youngblood and was our minor league coordinator, so I think I had that a little bit of that skill set. And then that next year, Eric Young was calling me in, and he taught me how to watch video on pitchers. And he said, "This is what I look for. This is what I do." And so he took the time to really mentor me in that base running. And also Gibby, even though he was the manager, took time, because he was a great base runner and a really smart player. So I was surrounded by great coaches. And then a couple years later, Dave McKay came over, and I call him the Godfather. And he's been coaching first base in the big leagues, I think, for 50 years. He's 70-something years old, and he had a little different strategy than EY, but same thing. He would watch video every day, and a lot of that again is mental. I mean, we're training in the off season. I have a sprint coach, and I'm working on stealing and correct form and getting as faster as I can. But there's a mental component of that, and I think just wanting to be a good base runner is important, because it's not just speed. Some of it's going first to third, reading balls in the dirt. It's not just stealing bases, knowing where the outfield's playing, when you can take that extra base, when you should be aggressive, or when you need to, not make sure you are 100% if you're going to take that extra bag. So that's definitely a mental thing. And, it's like just something you got to want to be good at.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think it's probably the best example of something that, unless you're really a big baseball fan and follow the game and watch it a lot, you can, all right, you steal bases. Okay, it's a stat we can keep, but the first to third, the second to home, the when to run and when not to run, that's really like the nuance of the game that, again, can apply to anything. where it's something that makes a big difference, but even if you can't maybe measure it all the time.
And I think the cool thing, there's been a lot of analytics that have been in the game, the last 10, 20 years, but the base running to me one is pretty cool. They've been able to quantify it a little bit more. I'm not saying it's perfect, but better as far as just stolen bases or not. It's like how many times, you're going first to third or taking the extra base. And when you see that show up, I remember one year I didn't do as good offensively, but my base running was really good compared to the previous year. And then you look at your kind of your WAR at the end of the year, and they were a lot closer than I felt like they should have been. Where I feel like the year before I had this amazing year. It was in 2015, and then 16 did his good. And then you look at the end of the year. I don't really look at my stats, but in the offseason, of course, you take a look and see where I could have improved. And the years were a lot more similar, and a big part of that was defensive base running. And the light kind of went off as well. As like, man, if I can be a good defender and base run well, then even though my offense can go up and down, I can still be I can still contribute and still be a very valuable player. And that's what the team needs and what front offices are looking for. And if you don't do one of those facets of the game, you better be amazing at the other two or the other one, and that's not always going to happen.
Yeah, no. Well, look, I'm sure you're chomping at the bit to get to the ballpark. I know you got things to do, but it's been awesome catching up, man. I appreciate you taking the time. It's been a lot of fun.
Yes, it's been great. This was a lot of fun. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the No One Is Watching podcast. If you haven't already, be sure to hit subscribe to be notified of future episodes. If you'd like to support the show, please take a second, leave a rating and review, or share it with your friends. If you're interested in similar content, you can check out my website at nooneiswatching.com, where you can subscribe to the newsletter, read my blog, or follow me on your social media platform of choice. Look, your time is valuable, so thank you for lending me some.